Marty, thank you for joining us. Welcome on the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely, Marty. So, I appreciate you taking the time to come chat with us and share your gold in your experience with our audience. So I appreciate it, Marty. Now, Marty, there may be people in our audience that are not as familiar with you as I am. So would you please take a minute to introduce yourself and share anything about your background that you would like people to know about?
Sure. I won't go all the way back because that'll take a little bit too much time. But my name is Marty Siewert. I'm currently an insights manager at Instacart. I've been in the marketing research world since 1994 or so. I started off at a CPG manufacturer, Dole Food Company, before I moved to Nielsen, where I spent the next 18 and a half years or so altogether in a variety of different roles, both on the manufacturer and on the retailer side of things. And after that, I spent 2.5 years as the global director of shopper insights for AB InBev or Anheuser-Busch before making the move to Instacart.
That's great, Marty. That's an interesting career and a lot of interesting organizations that you've been a part of. With the work that you've done in insights, Marty, across the threshold of your career, and now with your current role at Instacart, when your management, when your leadership comes to you and they say, "Great job, Marty," what are they typically depending on you for?
Well, first of all, it's just nice to get recognized at any time. But really, when it gets pointed out to me that I've done a good job, it's because the research, the insights that I turned around either for an internal or an external client was actionable and made a positive difference on the business. At the end of the day, somebody in my career said this a long time ago, but data without insights is overhead. So I really try to make sure that I'm not just sending over Excel files or something like that. I want to make sure that I add that layer of insight and implications. So it's sort of a what, so what, now what kind of a framework.
That's an interesting phrase that you use, Marty. Insights, data without insights is overhead, right? And that is so common, painfully common in our industry sometimes. Mm-hmm. And it's always a challenge internally when it does occur. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. When you are helping your internal teams in guiding them convert the data into insights, an insight that's actionable, what are some of the challenges that you typically come up against with your internal teams? Can you talk a bit about that?
Let me go back to my Nielsen days for a moment, and I'll start there. And I think it'll all make sense once it's done. But when I was working for Nielsen and working on a client project, the hardest part was trying to put together, the analysis along with the insights and recommendations without having really a full enough view of what was going on with the brand or with the company in terms of strategy. Some customers were much more open about it than others, and it just makes it more difficult for me if I don't have a full enough picture. I'm not saying I need to know everything that's going on, but I think if you're really looking at me as an insights partner, then there needs to be a level of trust and sharing up front when I start asking questions about, what's the purpose of this analysis? What's your goal, et cetera, et cetera. And I really took that approach with me when I went to Anheuser-Busch, because I just felt that I had many years on the on the vendor side, and I wanted to bring that experience with me to Anheuser-Busch, and I applied it with my research partners there as well, because I just thought it was much more important, and I would get better results as such. And I feel that I did. Now that I'm working at Instacart, one of the biggest reasons I took this role was because I wanted to get into an area that was growing. CPG, very slow growth overall, unless you're with one of the startup companies like Beyond Meat or something like that grows like crazy. But even that's going to taper off at some point. I wanted to be where the action was, and I didn't have much experience from an e-commerce perspective before I took this role. So I really leaned in, and I'm still learning about e-commerce and how everything works. It's not as simple as you'd think. The issues that I have now are really with clients who aren't necessarily as transparent. Oftentimes we deal with e-commerce teams that are more blockers and prevent us from talking to a broader audience at the company. And that's just the way it is. You just got to keep at it. We had one client last year. We just kept making a go for it. And, we come up with ideas around, okay, well, this summer's coming up. We think that this is going to be a good opportunity to potentially promote this particular brand. Let's turn that into a story and turn it into something that would be actionable for the customer. And it was things like that eventually enabled us to broaden our audience, to be able to speak to brand folks as well as the e-commerce team and get out of that trap. And so you just have to be persistent. But for those clients that are, open to us having that kind of broader access already, it just makes it go faster, makes everything easier.
That is very, very real on what you've shared, right? We've all been there. We all face these challenges. I face these personally, and I know a lot of our viewers may also be facing these, even if they're not in retail or CPG. To give our audience an experience share, when we at Gold Research, when we started out, we were focusing primarily on CPG. Then we were focusing concurrently on retail. And then we also picked up large clients like Amazon along the way, where they were reinventing the whole business. And I wanted to just unpack a little bit, Marty, what you said about teams sometimes internally losing sight and creating resistances or, having those roadblocks internally that we in the insights roles sometimes are challenged with. A lot of times, in the insights roles, I've seen, and I've been guilty of that as well, but I've seen some of our clients also get a little stuck in the shiny new gizmo on, hey, this is a new analytics tool, or this is a new research format, or, this is a new data visualization technique. And even out here within my team, we sometimes fall prey to it. But what we consult, internally as well as with our clients is remain focused on the overall agenda. And before we start getting sucked into how we'll solve for this, let's, dial back a bit and focus on what is the big impact this project is going to make on the business. In other words, Mr. or Miss Client, what is the big impact you want this project to make, right? What are you shooting for? What we often guide clients is don't just let it stay wishy-washy from an impact standpoint on, well, we want NPS to go up by X%, or we want satisfaction scores to go up by X%. Dial it up to financial impact, right? So, okay, if satisfaction goes up by X%, what does it mean for the company in terms of financial dollars, right? And the big thing that I've seen is when projects get designed for a certain financial impact, then two things happen. First is you no longer get questions from anyone on, hey, justify the ROI of this project. Why did we do this, right?
Mhm.
And the second and the bigger thing is, if it gets tied to that financial impact, then what happens is, at the C-suite level, at the senior decision-making level, conversations become much more smoother. Then you are no longer saying, well, I think we should make this change because 80% of our customers are saying this. Then it becomes more like, I think we should make this change because this is going to save us a couple of $1 million every quarter, right? Or this will allow us to upsell for X million or X amount of dollars, this year, right?
Right.
And the minute you say that, then the tone changes, right, across the room, and then people are like, well, how did you figure that out? Tell me more. And then you're like, well, because 80% are saying this, and this is what they spend with us, and basket size, and we can get into all of that. But I just wanted to double click on what you had said, Marty, because I thought that was so important for all of our peers that are out there struggling with those clients where they're butting heads. The experience share I want to share with them is, don't focus on your agenda, don't focus on their agenda, help them tie in what that project does from a financial impact standpoint. And then all of a sudden, the tone of the conversation will change.
That's a really good approach. I might borrow that.
Well, I'm pretty sure you've been doing it in your career without articulating it that way. But that's what I've seen, across the board, that becomes so important in some of these projects. But let me ask you this, Marty. So from your standpoint, when you are helping your internal teams, right? Let's focus on, your most recent customer journey or customer insights project. When you were helping your internal clients or your external clients, it doesn't have to be what you did at Instacart. It could be throughout your career. But I wanted to just talk to you about maybe your last customer journey project. Can you help our viewers understand what was the challenge that you were up against that made you focus on the customer journey? What did you do to uncover the customer journey, and what was the impact on the organization with the work that you did?
I'd be happy to. Yeah, I'm going to use an example from when I was at Anheuser-Busch. It was in my role, I was there to support insights teams around the globe. And in particular, it was our European category management team that was looking for support with e-commerce. So this is pre-COVID, where, in Europe, especially in UK and France, buying your groceries online was actually much more commonplace than in the US. In UK, it was primarily delivery, and in France, it was click and collect. So we needed to learn more because beer was just under penetrated online. In some ways, beer was the perfect thing to order online because of the weight, right? So especially if you're getting it delivered, it saves you not just time, but a little bit of effort. But that wasn't the case. And so we needed to understand how people were shopping online for groceries, not just beer, but, groceries, and then how people would search for beer, and what would, how do you get them to pick up your product and put it in the cart? So that was my first foray into anything e-commerce. We just really had very little work that had been done. Actually, most of it was done by other companies that we sort of would utilize to benchmark ourselves against. So it was important. And so the first thing, writing up the research brief, is to make sure that all the key stakeholders internally were, had the opportunity to provide input and feedback. And then in that brief, making sure that we were, that I was very clear in terms of what I wanted the outcomes to be. And then prioritizing, because, research projects can be very pricey sometimes, and especially at this point or at that point with e-commerce, because measuring e-commerce, especially CPG online, was not, it wasn't cheap. It was very manual. I'm sure it's probably, there are efficiencies now that make it easier for more companies to do this kind of customer journey work. But, this was 2017, 2019. So once we got all that, then I felt I had a really good research brief and put it out to several vendors to compare and contrast. And I didn't want to make the decision myself. I wanted to make sure that the key stakeholder on the category management team in Europe was able to listen to the pitches with me in terms of exactly what would be done, so that we could make the decision together. And, so first of all, some of the obstacles, excuse me, the vendor that we eventually chose had the most complete solution for us, because we really had nothing. So there was nothing historical that anybody could turn up. And we wanted to have as broad a picture as possible through the completion of a shopping journey. And we were able to do this, and it involved multiple facets. So it was, web online tracking via phone and the web. It was interviews, in-depth interviews. It was, I don't know what you call them, but sit-alongs. So they would sit next to the person and just observed how they would shop. So we had a mixture of qualitative and quantitative information that that was all brought together. And what was really, really helpful was, once it was complete, it wasn't just, like a PowerPoint deck that was handed over to us and presented, and, they said, hey, see you later. It came with a full half day of consulting with the company, where the research company brought in their team of people and reviewed the results, and then pointed out to us what we could have been doing better, and what we needed to focus on. And what came out of that was an understanding that we needed to focus on the basics first. Make sure you have the right photos. The photos that you have for your products aren't the same ones that are going to be, used in TV commercials, not even the same ones that you would use in your weekly flyers. They have to be, if it's a six-pack, don't show a six-pack, show a bottle with the six-pack behind it. Those kinds of tips that they gave us were really, really helpful, and gave us an opportunity to start focusing on things and prioritizing what we needed to do to get off the ground. I'm not sure, because I left the company actually during COVID, so I'm not sure exactly what the status was of that project, but they found it, the European team found it really, really helpful, and it ultimately strengthened our partnerships. They told me it ultimately strengthened our partnerships with the retailer customers over there, because we were coming in with suggestions that were actionable to them, because if we were selling more beer, beer is a higher margin item. So it was a win-win. So overall, it was pretty daunting at first, because when you start thinking about all the questions that people had to ask or wanted to ask, but through teamwork and an organized approach, I really felt like we came out with something that was actionable and eventually going to help us do a better job of selling more beer online.
That's a great example, Marty. Thank you for walking us through that. And there were so many best practices layered in that example that I want to unpack those a little more for our viewers. You know, I think first of all, the way you set up or you went about this project, and then this vendor also that you brought on, I think they were really good in sort of following your lead on this. A couple of things that I just want to double click for our audience as well, that I heard that you did was in terms of the initial planning that you did, on this journey project. I think that's really, really cool that you did that, Marty, in terms of prioritizing, key objectives. Something that we recommend and that we do to a lot of our clients as well is when we begin these journey projects, a lot of our clients are also in a similar state as you, where either they don't know what they don't know, or they may have done some journey evaluations, but it was done a little while ago. Or like in the pandemic, when the pandemic first began, well, there were a lot of our clients that we had done journey work for, and they're like, hey, we need a refresher here because now things are changing. They're evolving and they've changed, right before us in the last couple of years. So something that we recommend to a lot of our clients also, Marty, is don't jump into doing the execution right away. Something that we do upfront is what we call a hypothesis workshop. These are a couple of hours, and they can stretch all the way to a half day or a full day. But what we essentially do, Marty, is we'll invite different stakeholders in that organization to come chat with us on what they know or what they believe is true about the customer journey. And this serves two advantages, Marty, because, and I was reminded of this when you said, well, we didn't know what we didn't know when we were starting out, right? But there are always these hypotheses internally on, well, maybe is this true or is that true? So when we do these workshops, the two cool things that happen out of that is, the first thing is we have different team members talking about, well, at this journey stage, I think the customer is doing this because of X, Y, Z. And then you'll have somebody else in a different department get up and say, well, but I think they're doing this because of X, Y, Z. At that stage, we are just in the room, busy taking notes, because we're identifying these are what we call gaps in understanding, right? Where, okay, now there are conflicting viewpoints because different teams feel differently about this, right? And it helps us in designing the research, in really focusing on those key gaps. The second advantage is, it becomes a team building exercise as well. Because as you and I were talking about, sometimes there are conflicting interests, sometimes there are roadblocks. So doing something like this upfront enables everybody to come buy in and provide their input, where, now they're taking ownership in, okay, well, this is a gap, help me identify it. It also prevents a situation, Marty, where we go do the work, and then at the end, a client or some team member gets up and says, well, I already knew that. You're not telling me anything new, right? So we take care of those up front. A second thing that you mentioned, Marty, that I found to be really insightful, and I wanted to draw the attention of our audience to it, is what you talked about was at the end, instead of just getting a report, you had this whole discussion session, with that vendor, right? And that is something we encourage a lot of our clients as well. We, in fact, label those as activation workshops. And the format is the same, where we go in and we're having these discussions on everything that we've uncovered, not just the journey map, but every insight that is, that has been developed or harnessed in the course of that research.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially what we're also doing, Marty, is we're effectively filling in the gaps that we had identified up front. And,
Right.
and something that we do, Marty, that I don't see a lot of other companies do, so I'm touting a little bit of our horn here, is we do a couple of these. So, we'll do these activation workshops for different departments because the messaging tends to be different, right? If you are talking to marketing, well, they care more about, well, tell me what I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Does my ad spend get affected? Talk to me in my language, right? What
Right.
does it mean for my business? And if you're talking to folks in operations, well, then for them, the insights are a little different, right? So the story needs to be told a little different. But that is something so key. And I wanted to double click on this because so many times, clients, or, we've seen it with our peers, that so much effort and love and tears and hard work goes in, developing that report. And then people take a look at it and it just goes and sits on somebody's desk and nothing ever gets done about it.
Right.
So I really felt good about what you had shared over there. And I wanted people to know that this is a best practice, that there are companies that do it. And, if the vendor you're working with doesn't do it, I strongly recommend ask for it. Ask for this time on site, or in this pandemic time, well, this could be an online workshop, right? But label it as an activation workshop. That's what we call it. And that's what it is. It's not so much just a readout of a PowerPoint deck. It's more about, this is what the insight is. This is how you can use it in your business, right? And for the research consultants out there, that are worth their salt, then they need to come with their expertise blended in on, well, this is what we recommend you do with this insight, or this is what we've seen others do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that way, it's not just a data point, now it's an actionable insight.
Right. Totally agree.
Wonderful. So Marty, lots of good insights and lots of good experience shares over there. And thank you for sharing that. One question that I often ask our guests, that I want to ask you as well, is, you've had these successes with these projects and you've had a good, successful career so far. Reflecting on these journey projects or reflecting on these insights projects, if you could turn back the clock and do it all over again, even if we reflect on that previous example that you shared, is there anything that you would do different to improve the impact that project had?
Yes. I would have, knowing what I know now, I would have publicized it more internally with other key stakeholders, and even in different markets. I should have, if I could go back, I wish I would have found a mechanism, and there was one, right? Through my boss, I could have set something up, because the findings, while not necessarily applicable across all markets, were just so important. And, the e-commerce train was coming right at us. It was going to hit us upside the head. And it would have helped people in different markets be better prepared. And so I wish I would have done that. In terms of the setup, the project itself, it was, I feel very good about how everything went. And I do wish I would have done that. It would have benefited the company first. It would have benefited the vendor, because I think, this is something we should have replicated in other markets. And it ultimately would have, put Anheuser-Busch in a better position when COVID did hit, honestly. I wasn't there on the e-commerce teams because we were so focused on other stuff when COVID hit. But, certainly with the explosion of online purchasing of groceries and including alcohol and beer, I could have helped the company be more prepared. But I'm sure they're doing fine. Actually, I'm sure they're doing fine.
Now, thank you for your transparency, Marty. And that is what I really enjoy about you. You're so honest. So I really appreciate that. That is also something, Marty, that I have seen a lot of folks in the insights world sometimes struggle with. So I really appreciate that you brought that up. One experience share that I want to do with some of our viewers on this is, it goes back to what you had talked earlier, Marty, about in your example about those activation workshops or having those discussions. Another thing that I think helps people is speaking to the audience, right? And sometimes customizing the insights for that audience, for that dissemination or that sharing. I'll give you an example. The first time we, helped a client out with a customer journey map that was retail CPG focused, we looked at their overall market. We gave them a journey map, and we broke it down by different segments, different personas. And then when they were in discussions with Walmart, which also happens to be a client of ours, so we have a sense of how they think, the client came back to me and said, they were interested in the insights in the overall market. So I think we did good. And so as I started following up with the client on, well, what happened? How was the discussion? What we realized was, while they were interested in the overall category, it was evident to me that they had specific questions about their shopper that particular journey map had not addressed because it was encompassing the overall market. So, what we did was we sliced and diced the data again, and we broke the journey map out and developed customized versions specifically for Walmart shoppers. And then we customized them for their key competitors, in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And the client didn't know about it. So this was just something we did on our own that wasn't, part of the scope. But we did that, and he really liked it. And he sent it over to his contact at Walmart. And then he told me he got a call. Walmart wanted to have another discussion with them on their shoppers. And so check this out, Marty. The discussion on the overall category was 30 minutes. The follow-up discussion on Walmart shoppers was a four-hour event. Okay. And so I'm sharing that with you and our audience, that's really the power of sometimes customization, where, and it's also, to your point about sharing that insight throughout the organization. And so sometimes as an experience share, that is what could help in sharing that message, where you customize it, not just for your internal different audiences, but also for different, types of clients, external clients or internal clients that you may have. So now, our standard practice now is whenever we're doing any kind of a journey map, it also gets sliced and diced, not just by the overall category, but also by different key channels, by different key players, and by different personas, to really give clients that holistic viewpoint. And what we've seen is that in conjunction with everything else that we've talked about, really helps people make, more use of it, and it enhances the usability of these insights.
Mm-hmm.
So what you said sort of sparked that thought in my mind. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
But Marty, this has been a great discussion. I know we're at the end of our time. Before we wrap this up, any final comments that you want to share with our audience?
Just, well, you mentioned a couple things. One, you mentioned in the beginning that people get distracted by shiny objects, shiny new objects. I've been very consistent over the years that shiny objects can be wonderful. They can turn out to be, provide you with insights from data that you didn't know were possible. That's great. But don't take your eye off the basics. Don't take your eye off, just basic understanding of how you run your business. So for example, if you're a CPG company, when your POS data says your volume is going up or going down, ask the question why, and ask it from a consumer perspective. So use your basic panel data to understand, is it because of more people, more trips, or more spend? It always comes back to that, and people tend to forget that those tools are available to them. And it really is those foundational elements that help to complete the story then of how you got from point A to point B. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is just to be curious, continue to ask questions. Even though I'm in a role right now that is focused internally and not on external research, I still take calls with people who connect with me via LinkedIn. Not always. I don't have the time to do all of them, but I just think it's important to understand what how things might be evolving or how things might be changing. And it's just a really good way to stay on top of things. So that's why I just think it's important to say yes to some of those invitations, and the ones that make sense, the ones that make you curious, and then keep learning. Research is an evolving world, and it's always going to be that way. So I encourage people to continue to be curious.
Excellent, Marty. I'll take that as a plug for Gold Research. So all you viewers out there, whenever you get a call from Gold Research or me, take that call. Wonderful, Marty. Always a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing these pearls of wisdom.
I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate the opportunity.